Yeah, that's that Levite. Well, what's that doing all the way in Zimbabwe and South Africa? Oh my goodness. So you telling me Israel's up here and they came all the way down to South Africa and Zimbabwe and they just happen to have Levite DNA? Oh my goodness. What else is out there in the continent of Africa regarding the Jews and the lost tribes? Nowhere in the Bible does it say that it has to be maternal. You kind of see the opposite. Whenever there's a genealogy list, it's the men. So at least you could say the Lemba are one of the only groups that have kept the paternal tradition. Whereas the modern day Jews today, they all tell you you're Jewish if your mom is Jewish. Where did that come from? Zephaniah 3 verse 10. And it reads, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." Hey there guys, welcome to Hidden Bayah. Today we are reacting to the African community that was told it didn't exist. Now this is the first video we're doing in a series where we uncover history about the lost tribes of Israel, starting with many of the tribes that are supposedly scattered across the continent of Africa. And we're going to figure out why they're not widely represented in the Jewish world and what are the implications if these guys really are Jews, you know? So this is the first video we're watching in this series, and yeah, it's going to be exciting. We're going to learn a lot about identity. We're going to learn a lot about what this means when it comes to being a Jew and who is a Jew, etc. So it should be exciting. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started.
More than 2,000 years, a forgotten community has kept the traditions of an ancient faith. Like all other Jews, the Lemba community of southern Africa are strict monotheists. They celebrate the new moon and keep kosher. They circumcise their baby boys and observe Shabbat. And like all other Jews, they've passed on their story from generation to generation. A story of exile and diaspora, persecution and resilience. It's the story of a faith that sustained them over centuries of isolation. Lemba Jews have always known who they are, but the wider Jewish community didn't. When the two finally collided, the Lemba's existence came as quite a surprise to other Jews. And with that surprise came skepticism. So how did the Lemba Jewish community become so disconnected from the rest of the Jewish world?
I mean, that is a good question, because even today, without knowing any of this information, when people think of Jews, they only have one image. They only have one representation. And when I say people, I mean people that maybe are not well versed in, you know, the migrations and the history. There's typically just one image. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the world reacts as more of this information becomes more mainstream. Because as much as we're only hearing about these Jews in Africa, you know, in recent history, they have been known about for hundreds of years. They've known who they are, and we're only just finding this out now. So it will be very interesting to see what this means now in regards to identity, in regards to, you know, politics. If, for instance, they started doing genetic testing and figuring out who's more Jewish and who's less Jewish, and etc., etc. So all of this stuff is very interesting.
Lemba communities have lived in southern Africa for centuries, and yet their neighbors have never considered them native to the continent. They were always seen as foreign transplants from somewhere else. Even their name reflected their difference. Lemba means turban, a reference to the unique headgear they'd wear. Sometimes they were called Mushavi, or merchants, a nod to their occupation as merchants, traders, and highly skilled artisans. As a minority, the Lemba lived at the mercy of local governments. Often, they took on indispensable social roles, serving the royal family as healers or working with precious metals. It's a familiar refrain throughout Jewish history. All over the world, Jews often served the upper echelons of society as doctors or financiers, traders or artisans, until the powers that be got tired of this stubborn minority that refused to fit in. But Jews the world over had little interest in fitting in. The Lemba were no different. They had an ancient tradition to safeguard.
The story that has been passed down orally.
Musoni Pumudzo. Musoni Pomudza. Boom. There we go. Lemba, spiritual practitioner and creative. Okay. Let's go.
From my forefathers, from my grandparents, from my parents.
That sounds like a Shona name. Musoni Pomudza. I don't know. Could be wrong. Could be right.
Is that plus minus 2,500 years ago, we descended from Hebrew Israelites and we fled Judea, escaping Babylonian captivity, and settled in a city called Sena in Yemen. And upon settling there, we were fleeing further wars and turmoil, so we migrated into Africa.
A world away from their ancient homeland, they maintained their biblical traditions. They slaughtered their animals according to Torah law and maintained a strict separation of meat and milk. They didn't eat unkosher animals like pigs or mice. On long journeys, they'd bring their own chickens so that they were never at risk of eating improperly slaughtered foods. Some Lemba are so strict about kosher laws that they refuse to eat at their own relatives' houses.
You still find people who...
Jacob Tabagali. Hey, let me stop. Lemba activist. My bad, guys. My bad.
When they visit some of their relatives who are not Lemba because of intermarriages, they would carry their own utensils. They don't want to end up eating food which has been cooked in something which we used to cook. The food they are not allowed to eat.
To be honest, yeah, I'm not Jewish, but I keep the dietary laws. I'm a bit picky with food, especially for someone's house that they don't keep kosher or they don't, keep the dietary laws. So I understand that. To the outside world, it may seem a bit crazy, like, oh, I have to bring my own knife and fork. I have to make sure I'm not using the same utensils as someone that eats pork. But I may not go that far with it, but I hear it. You know what I mean? Because pork is nasty. Unclean meats are nasty. I ain't trying to eat at someone's crib and there's like bacon and pork grease and all that stuff all over their utensils and stuff. So I hear it, but you can just wash it in it. So I'm not as, difficult, but I hear it.
To Jewish customs doesn't end there. The Lemba use the lunisolar Jewish calendar, observing the new moon each month and welcoming the new year in autumn. They rest on Shabbat. They pray to one God. In other words, they maintain the traditions and rituals that Jews have held dear for millennia. And just as these customs set...
You know what's interesting? I wonder how the Lemba traditions differ from the neighboring tribes, because it's almost as if the assumption is these particular traditions are unique to the Lemba and it differs them from all the other tribes around them. So essentially they're saying the Ndebele, the Shona, the Zulu, the Nguni, they don't have a Sabbath. They don't abstain from unclean animals. They don't circumcise. They don't do all these things, which in reality they do. A lot of the things that in this video that they're saying that the Lemba do, those tribes do. And we'll get into this in another video, but there's even missionaries, Christian missionaries, that write letters documenting the spiritual practices of many of the Bantu tribes, and they themselves admit that a lot of the things that they're doing can be found in the Bible. The Levirate marriage, the scapegoat ritual, the animal sacrificial, all that stuff. So I don't know how are the Lemba doing it, or the other tribes are doing it. Everyone in Africa seems to be doing something that's found in the Bible. I don't know. We'll get into all of that in another video, but obviously the narrative is the Lemba are uniquely Jewish and all the other tribes are Gentile or non-Jewish, which is up for debate, but I don't think it's a good enough argument to say they're keeping the Sabbath, they're doing these things, the other tribes are not. When in reality, when you look at African spiritualism, especially amongst the Bantu tribes, there is a form of monotheism, or at least henotheism, where it's like a supreme deity and lesser spirits or intermediaries, which in this case it will be like ancestors, Amadlozi, or Vidzimu, right, the spirit. But irregardless, you can see the parallels in the Bantu tribes and their spiritual traditions with the Bible. So I wouldn't just say the Lemba are uniquely showing Hebrewisms. I wouldn't say that, but that's just me.
Jews apart in Europe and North Africa and Southwest Asia, these customs set Lemba apart from neighboring communities.
Local community people who were not Lemba people would want Lemba people to assimilate in their way of living. But Lemba people were never comfortable with that, because then that would conflict with how we do things. Kashrut laws, no intermarriage between locals and Lemba Jew people. So there was always that struggle of mandate.
So if the Lemba have been practicing Judaism for thousands of years, why have they been so isolated from other Jews? That disconnect can't be explained by geography alone. After all, there are tens of thousands of Jews in South Africa, mostly descendants of Lithuanian Jews who
No comment.
rush. Why didn't these communities connect? To answer that, you need to know a little bit about South Africa. South Africa bills itself as the Rainbow Nation, a proud and diverse coalition of people from all backgrounds.
A rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world.
That includes Jews, some of whom might look familiar.
I had no idea Daniel Radcliffe. Are they saying he's from South Africa? Harry Potter from South Africa? I had no idea, bruh. Wow.
Might look familiar. But for decades, the Rainbow Nation wasn't a rainbow at all. It was an apartheid state that slotted its people into a strict racial hierarchy to segregate and control people of mixed race, Indian, and African descent. Whites were at the top, and black people, i.e. the majority of South Africa's population, were at the very, very bottom.
The easy life is on the white side of the colour bar, and the hard life, with very few exceptions, is on the dark side.
In apartheid South Africa, your race was your destiny. It determined your education and your hometown, who you could marry, and what social services you were allowed. Interracial relationships were a crime. No one was allowed to reach across racial categories to build genuine connections with someone of another race, not even if they shared something much, much deeper. And so the Lemba, Jews who had practiced biblical Judaism for centuries, were designated black and divided from South Africa's mostly Ashkenazi Jews, whom the government classified as white.
That is
Interesting.
why our fellow Jewish people within the white community did not know about us. The only time they would have interaction with black people is when they hire them to come and work at their houses as maids and helpers or garden boys, or at the offices. You didn't have the opportunity to live together, to know each other, to know the cultural way of living.
These policies put Lemba Jews in an unholy bind. They were too Jewish for the native Africans, too black to be considered Jewish. And any attempt to bust out of the constraints of a single demographic box was met with confusion and disdain. When Pumudzo was a little girl filling out school forms, she wouldn't mark herself as black or white. Like Jews all over the world, unsure of where we fit in, she chose the one category that seemed big enough to include her: other.
The teacher one day asked, why are you
Yeah, but you're still black.
picking other? You're black. So I'm like, I'm not just black. Yes, I am black. And I am an African.
Because it's
yeah.
almost like, oh, I'm black, yeah, but I don't want to be like treated like those other black people. I'm more special. This is like a weird kind of vibe I'm getting from it, but maybe I'm thinking too much into it.
Yes, but it's not the entirety of who I am. And I would always say, I'm a Jews. I was told, no, you can't be. And that always boggled me. I said, how can somebody tell me, no, I'm not what I am?
It's not easy to have your identity defined by an outsider, but it's even harder to have it dismissed by your own people. When the wider Jewish community finally learned of the Lemba's existence, many were skeptical. Some demanded proof of the Lemba's Jewishness. Others romanticized them as a lost tribe. Lemba pushed back against this label. How can they be lost when their ancient oral history situates them among all other Jews? The word lost implies that they've let go of their Judaism, but they've been practicing Judaism all along.
That's a good point. When they say the lost tribes, lost to who? Because if they know they're Israelites, they know they're Jews, they're not lost. You may be unaware of them, and by you I mean the world or the Jewish diaspora. They may be unaware of Jews in Africa, but the Jews in Africa have always known they're Jews. They've always known they're Israelites. They've never been lost. So that sort of does imply a bias of who controls the identity being Jewish, because it's as if the ones that have always been seen as Jews are the ones that give the stamp of approval on who's Jewish and who's not Jewish. Despite the fact that the Jews in Africa have been very clear on who they are for hundreds of years, it's only until recent history that they're actually getting acknowledged as even being descendants of Israelites. So I find that very interesting. There's clearly still a political hierarchy in the Jewish diaspora. And I spoke to a Mizrahi Jew, which is like an Arab Jew, on Omegle a few weeks ago. And he told me that even in Israel, the white Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, they see themselves as better than the Arab Jews, than the Mizrahi. So if there's that turmoil in-house between people that both live in the land, imagine the turmoil between the Ashkenazi Jew and someone who's as black as me. So it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder many things. But this is only the first video, so let's not get too crazy with it.
And if anyone doubts their origins, well, they've got the genetic receipts. Relying on DNA tests is a tricky business. Our genes are far from the only thing that makes us Jewish, but it's pretty cool to see ancient narratives match up with DNA evidence. The same ancient story spelled out in genetic code. And in the case of the Lemba, the evidence was fascinating. And it all started with a few Lemba activists. The apartheid system was exceedingly cruel, and a part of that system granted limited power to some indigenous African communities. But when the Lemba petitioned to be recognized as a distinct African community, the government dismissed their claims. Again, they were too Jewish to be considered native Africans, and too African to be seen as fully Jewish. But for centuries, the Lemba had refused to let others define them. They certainly weren't going to let the apartheid government decide who they were. Lemba activists told their story to anyone who would listen. And eventually, they caught the attention of researchers who suggested they use science to settle the matter once and for all.
Now this is the time-old question. Show us the proof. Let's look at the genetics. But I don't feel like they are entirely transparent about the DNA testing, because as you will see, the Lemba were tested, and interestingly, they had a higher percentage of the Cohen gene, which is the priestly gene, than many of the other Jews in the diaspora. This is just one African Jewish group. There's plenty of others. So genetics is something that definitely needs to be explored a lot more when it comes to that question. And I don't mean comparing the DNA of African Jews to other Jews. No, let the benchmark be the remains found in Israel. Dig up the bones, take some samples, and let that be the foundation. Because even within this test, it's not entirely sanitary, or it's not entirely honest, because they're comparing the African Jews to modern day Jews and using the modern day Jews as the benchmark for Jewry. So they're using the modern day Jews genetics to say, if you match this, then you are Jewish. The foundation and the benchmark should be the remains. But will that ever happen? I don't know.
For all. So the Lemba agreed to give DNA samples to be studied against others, and the researchers found something exciting. The Lemba weren't just descended from Jews. They had the distinct genetic marker found only in Kohanim, aka Jews from the priestly caste. It's so
That's that Levite. Yeah, that's that Levite. Oh, what's that doing all the way in Zimbabwe and South Africa? Oh my goodness. So you telling me Israel's up here and they came all the way down to South Africa and Zimbabwe and they just happen to have Levite DNA? Oh my goodness. What else is out there in the continent of Africa regarding the Jews and the lost tribes? If this one tribe who they have thoroughly tested and investigated, probably more thoroughly than many modern day Jews, they can't help but admit, oh my goodness, they've been here this whole time. And trust me, as you will see in this series, They are not the only ones.
Distinct that only a small subset of Jewish men carry it, including the Lemba.
One of the clans of the Lemba, the Buba, was supposed to be the kind of priestly clan.
The Buba.
And those from the Buba clan had the very signature that we found in priests
Listen to what he's saying. They had the signature that we found in
worldwide.
priests worldwide. Okay, what did I say earlier? They are using the modern day Jews as the benchmark. Do you understand that? They're not using the remains, the Levantine remains, first, second temple skeletons, DNA samples from ancient times. They're using modern day Jews as the benchmark. Interesting.
Sephardi. And this was a very exciting discovery. By now there was data that seemed to push things in a direction that was not at all inconsistent with the oral tradition of the Lemba.
It was an incredible discovery, but one that raised more questions than answers. Because if the Lemba were descended from Jews, and not just Jews, but Jewish priests, then why didn't they call themselves Kohanim, like all other Jewish priests? For that matter, why didn't Lemba Jews have Torah scrolls or speak the Hebrew language? Why did Lemba communities sacrifice a lamb on Passover instead of having a Seder? It all goes back to their isolation. Judaism is a highly communal religion. We need one another. And for thousands of years, the Lemba were cut off from other Jews. Despite their fierce refusal to assimilate, they took on some of the characteristics of their neighboring communities, just like other Jewish communities around the globe. Don't forget, the Lemba were a minority subjected to mighty pressure from their neighbors. They resisted, but certain traditions got lost. And in that way, they're no different from other Jewish communities that were forced to adapt to their environment. For thousands of years, they defied their isolation to maintain practices that other Jewish communities lost, like sacrificing a lamb on Passover. Their isolation became their strength. And even if certain traditions fell away, the Lemba themselves weren't lost.
It's a lack of knowledge as well, lack of not wanting to learn. I think because they don't want to take the time to fully understand our story, our plight, our history, I think it also makes it more difficult because our history is passed down orally.
No Jewish community exists in a vacuum. We've all been shaped by outside forces, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Because of our complicated racial discriminatory history, you had this separation of the group which has always been part and parcel of the broader community, but not been known or forgotten. When they realize that they have cousins in their own backyards, that's when they started opening up. It's a gradual process, but they've come to accept that we are not the only Jewish people in this part of the world. We have our cousins who have a darker hue.
But and even that, right, which is another thing we'll get into eventually, there's an assumption that the Jews in ancient times didn't have a darker hue. Because that presupposition, that bias, it undermines any claim for African Jews, because the general idea is the Jews were olive-skinned, or they were just tanned, or they were light-skinned, or whatever the categorization is, which again, olive-skin doesn't even make sense, because olives are either green or black. I know what they're saying, but it doesn't make sense. We just accept things that don't make sense, apparently. I guess if you look at olive oil, it's yellow. Is that why it's all called olive-skinned? I don't know. But anyway, olive-skinned, right? But what does the Bible say? What does ancient history say? We'll get into that. Because ancient historians talk about how the Jews looked. And they compare them to people. So that's a whole other thing. But I think that's another big reason why African Jewry has been undermined. Because they don't associate melanin, being melanated, as we are supposed to be melanated. Adam was melanated. They don't associate that with being Jewish. But the guy that looks Polish, the guy that looks like he's from Slovakia, there's no question. Very interesting.
The road to widespread recognition has been bumpy, to say the least.
All Lemba men are the sons of prior Lemba men, but Lemba women can come from anywhere and can join the Lemba clan. And once again, that underlines the fact that by rabbinic status, the Lemba can't be Jewish because they don't have matrilineal descent.
And yet, Lemba Jews have thousands of years of tradition. They have DNA evidence.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Rabbinic tradition, modern day Jewish tradition states, in order for you to be a Jew, your mother has to be a Jew. Your father can be Greek, Roman, whatever. As long as the mom is a Jew, you're a Jew. Again, nowhere in the Bible does it say that it has to be maternal. You kind of see the opposite. Whenever there's a genealogy list, it's the men. So at least you could say the Lemba are one of the only groups that have kept the paternal tradition. Whereas the modern day Jews today, they all tell you you're Jewish if your mom is Jewish. Where did that come from? Because that doesn't seem to be the case biblically. And then that kind of muddies the waters even more, because then if the argument is, you know, these people go back to Abraham or they go back to Jacob, you're not looking at that paternity. You're looking at that maternally, which you could argue isn't an issue because you're 50% your mother, you're 50% your dad. And if the mom does go back to Abraham, then technically you come from Abraham through the mom. So technically, yeah, you could still come from Abraham or Jacob through your mom. It was a patriarchal system. And all of a sudden now, identity is being established via the mother. Makes you question why that's the case. Makes you question why that's the case. But oh well.
And they required that non-Lemba women convert into the community. So why weren't those conversions considered valid? Why wasn't their DNA and their history enough? This question isn't unique to Lemba Jews. It's been asked about many isolated Jewish communities, from the Igbo to the Kaifeng Jews to India's Bnei Israel. And no one can agree on who gets the last word when determining whether someone is a Jew. Is it the community itself? Is it historians, geneticists, rabbis? Is it the Jewish state whose citizenship laws depend on proving Jewish descent?
All right, that's enough of that. That's enough of that. That's enough of that. Let me show you some verses in the Bible before I end this video, just kind of demonstrating this migration path. Because some people are watching this thinking, oh, that was a nice video, but where's all of this in the Bible? Like, I don't see this in the Bible. Show me, right? I'm just going to show you 2 verses, then a little nugget, a little Easter egg elsewhere, which I'll show you in a minute, just to kind of show you that it's always been there. The information's always been there. But due to, like was said in the video, political, racial biases, discrimination, white supremacy, I would even argue, all of these different factors and systems have been put in place to where even when the information is right in front of you, you are not able to comprehend it. I've literally spoken to some people and they're like, but you're black. But you're black. What does that mean? What does black even mean? That's a whole nother conversation. I'm red. But that's a whole nother conversation. Anyway, Zephaniah 3 verse 10. And it reads, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. And to read in the Hebrew, for those that know Hebrew, because I can read Hebrew, Me'ebe Lenahare Kush Atare Bat Putsei Yobilun Min Khati. Again, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Now, let's break this down. In this verse, the claim is, obviously the whole chapter, there's a context. This is referring to a dispersal, right? This is referring to God reclaiming and bringing back the nations, right? Or the Israelites that are scattered in the nations. And in verse 10, he specifically acknowledges that there are some of his people scattered beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and eventually, prophetically, they will bring his offering, right? They will return back, or they'll come to worship him again, right? Now you're probably wondering, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, what does that mean? Well, let's look at a map, right? And I just pulled this map off Google Images, right? You can literally just even pull up a map of Africa, and if you know where the Nile is, that goes all the way down into, Ethiopia, and then you can kind of make the conclusion the same ways. But essentially, there's that one big river, the Nile, that goes all the way into Kush, right, down to Lake Victoria. Everything beyond that, within the same landmass, is West Africa, Central Africa. You could even say Northwest, Central, South. All of that is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Those are the regions that would be beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Now, again, what did the verse say? It says that his dispersed are beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and they shall one day bring his offering. So, again, make do with that as you will. Again, you've just seen the video. Genetic studies have proved the Lemba share common genetics with modern day Jews, and their oral traditions are lining up with even what the Bible says. Another verse is Isaiah 11 verse 11, and it says, "And it shall come to pass in that day," again this is talking about the restoration of the remnant, "in that day the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to what? To recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea." Now, according to biblical prophecy, the Jews would be scattered across the whole world, the whole four corners of the world, not just in Africa, right? But notice the two regions mentioned in the two countries or areas mentioned in verse 11, Egypt, Cush. This is in Africa. Cush is deeper, obviously, in Africa, because biblically, when it says Cush, it doesn't just mean Ethiopia. It literally means even Sudan and a wider region below the Nile, below Egypt, right? Because Ethiopia or Cush, if you look at old maps, it wasn't just the modern day place Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa. It was pretty much the rest of Africa, because they didn't have names for some of these areas yet. So if you look at very old maps, Cush would have been like the sub-Saharan Africa, essentially. So makes you wonder. So it's in the Bible that the Jews will be scattered in these regions and then also reclaimed from these regions. Makes you wonder. Maybe there's a lot more Jews in Africa than we thought. Now, I want to show you something very interesting, because I don't just use the Bible as evidence to show migration paths and, where the descendants of Israel are today. Because even in the rabbinic texts, in the Gemara, in the Jewish traditions, they allude to this idea, right? And there's differing opinions. Not all the rabbis or all the sages having a consensus on this argument where the Jews went. But notice what it says here. According to Marzutra, right? This is from Sanhedrin 94a. The question was asked, right? To where were the 10 tribes exiled? Where did the 10 tribes go? Marzutra, who is a Babylonian Jewish rabbi, I won't say he's famous, but he's well known, right? And he's well studied under a prestige school, right? He says that they were scattered to Afriki. Rabbi Hanana says to the Selig Mountains. Okay, differing opinions. But Afriki is essentially Africa. Now, a Babylonian Jew, and I believe it's 400 CE, I believe so. He's saying, no, they're in Africa. Where the 10 tribes are in Africa. This is in the rabbinic Jewish text. This is not some black Hebrew Israelite website, some, black whatever website. This is Sepharia. You can see Sepharia. This is quoting Sanhedrin 94a, again, Talmudic tractate, and a commentary from Marzutra, a famous rabbi, saying they went to Afriki. to the land of Africa. Now, that's the end of this video for now. There's a lot more I can say, but this is just the first video addressing the Lemba. We're going to look at other tribes. We're going to build a big series, and then we're going to come to a culmination at the end where I reveal my DNA results. Because guess what? I took a DNA test because I was sick and tired of people saying this is a lie and all these things. Again, I don't want to spoil that. We'll see what my DNA is saying. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, looking to do a lot more of these reactions. Let me know if there's any tribes in Africa you want me to look into. Any tribes that maybe you're from that you've noticed. I see myself in the Bible. Why is no one talking about this? You know, my tribal traditions, all of these things. Let me know. And I'll react to that video, and we'll kind of build this playlist, this journey of discovering, of self-discovery, essentially. Reclaiming what was lost. Because we were never lost. We knew who we were. So, yeah, man. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, share, and subscribe. And stay hidden.